Tēnā koutou. Look, koa hau te kahautu o Tahu pānga o Ngāi Tahu. Koa hau Mike Sang. Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm Mike Sang, Chief Executive of Ngāi Tahu Holdings. I'm going to talk about social licence to operate, which is a little bit embarrassing because we know next to nothing about it. So we'll give you our perspective of how we go about it, and I'm sure there'll be some similarities and some things that are different, as is always the case with us. I've started with that slide, and we always start with that slide. The only debate in the iwi on that slide is whether the term should be I am Ngāi Tahu or we are Ngāi Tahu. Technically we should be we are Ngāi Tahu, but the marketing people love that photo and I am Ngāi Tahu snuck in there. So at our heart, we're a family business for the benefit of the family. We don't exist to make money. We exist to support the family achieve the aspirations for itself. And if we're not contributing to that, then there's absolutely no point having the settlement or the businesses or anything that we've currently built up over the last few years. And in there is the crux of how we approach our social licence to operate, I think. And there is a number of things I'll talk through, but some I might just touch on now. Ngāi Tahu Holdings, you often hear, has been successful because it's been kept separate from the other operations of the iwi. It's total bollocks. Been successful because we've successfully integrated holdings into the iwi. We all understand what our roles are, and we all go about our roles in a way that works collectively together, and where there's a degree of trust and confidence each other get on with their things. So for a commercial company, that means an expectation that we get on and make money in a way that resonates with Ngāi Tahu's values and resonates with what we're trying to achieve in terms of progressing towards the family's aspirations. And that, I could probably stop there, but I've got a few other slides because otherwise I won't use up all my time. I know Christopher is actually a better speaker than me, he's following me, but to be fair, he should be out there getting people into New Zealand to go on our jet boat ventures and other things. So we signed our settlement in 98, so we're 15 years post-settlement. It's nothing. We spent 7 generations getting to the settlement. We spent God knows how many generations before the settlement, before that dispute even same. So 15 years, we regard ourselves as half of one. And still children, and still learning about how we're going and where we're going. We have 52,500 registered members. Around the time of settlement, we had 17,000. We haven't tripled our population in 15 years. It's just that the progress the iwi has made and the efforts that so many people have done post-settlement has meant that we've had people who wouldn't otherwise want to put their hand up and say, I am Ngāi Tahu, starting to put their hand up and say, I am Ngāi Tahu, and joining the register. We trace all our ancestry back to our first ancestor, who obviously wasn't, there was people before him, Tahu Pōtiki, East Coast. Ngāi Tahu made its way down through the East Coast into the South Island some time ago, so it has very strong whakapapa connections back to the iwi around that particular area. We judge if you're Ngāi Tahu or not, a slightly arbitrary way I guess, but it works well for the iwi. Back in the 1848, 1853 there was a census. And that census led to a list of Ngāi Tahu at the time that we call the Blue Book. So anyone who can trace their ancestry back to one of those people in the Blue Book qualifies for Ngāi Tahu membership of the iwi. We are South Island based, and we spread right around it. We're a little different. I don't know if it makes any difference whatsoever, but we're the only iwi in that green space. I think there's something like 70 iwi north of us. Ngāi Tahu are quite fiercely independent, I think all iwi are, but even each of our runanga underneath that, we've got 18 what we call papatipa runanga, which are basically marae-based communities based around the South Island. Each of those has independence, and they will say somewhat flippantly that we only really came together collectively to achieve 2 things. One was to chase Te Rauparaha out of the South Island when he came down marauding, and the other time was to fight the settlement. So those links of whakapapa and those connections to Ngāi Tahu are very, very strong. But Ngāi Tahu by its nature is fundamentally a hapu or family-based organisation. It's just that we collectivise up. How we do that in an organisational sense is each of those 18 paparunanga select a person to go on our tribal council, for want of a better description, called Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu. And each of those processes for selecting a member onto that council, there is an electoral type process that backs it up. So we are basically a democratically elected organisation, and it's back to our core family members who are selected members on that council. Within what we call Tahu Group, we have two main arms. We've got the Holdings Corporation, which does operate as a single unit under that framework, and we have the Office of Tauranga, which looks after a range of our programs which are aimed towards achieving the aspirations of the iwi. So simplistically, we make money, pay it across, and the other side invest it. But it's not that simple. Everything we do contributes to the success or not of the iwi, and everything we do contributes to whether iwi members feel proud to be part of Ngāi Tahu or not. And if it's a not, there's simply no reason to have us. It's that simple. You might as well sell us and put the money into equities or passive equities or whatever and just take your cheque. If we're not actually contributing to those aspirations, we're not doing our job. Ngāi Tahu Holdings Group is in 5 parts, and the only reason I comment on it is each of those are quite different. I didn't like the bit about Kiwis having concerns on seafood. We're in there in a big way. Farming, we're in there in a big way as well. Today we've got about $1 billion of assets. We've contributed or distributed another 300 million to support our programs. We started with 170 million. We've averaged about a 15% compounding return for 15 years. More proudly, when we inherited the 170 million, we had no corporate structure. We had barely any people. We had no businesses, no track record, no nothing. All our businesses have been built from the ground up on the basis of what came out of that thing. We take a lot of pride from being independent, self-determination, what we call rangatiratanga, and this is reflected in the success we've had over the last 15 years. And while saying that, I keep repeating it, 15 years is half of one generation. We've got so much to learn, and we've made so many mistakes. Ngāi Tahu values. So this is the point I'm going to try and make, and probably not very well. Social license to operate, the cynic in me, being a finance guy, can interpret it as meeting your customers' expectations in order that they'll buy off you and not someone else in order to promote your profits further than your competition. By the way, if we look a nice place to work, then people will come and work for us, and we'll have better people, and we'll get more profits for shareholders. So being a finance guy, I'm into that in a big way, all for it. But we're a little bit different. We are an iwi, and there's only one Ngāi Tahu, and it's a single organisation. Our values are defined not by the people like me, they're defined by the members of the iwi. So all these values were those that individual members, whether they be chartered accountants or lawyers or environmentalists or factory workers or anything else, they chose these values based on their understanding of their culture and their history and their belief systems. So these values, every single part of the organisation here, it's on day one. So all the commercial operations have these values. All our people are expected to behave in accordance with these values. At our heart, our social licence to operate is to find businesses and ways of doing business that resonate with these values. So I've seen places where you go, well, here's my business, my competitive advantages, this is a sector in, this is what I need to do to be successful. Therefore, I need this type of values in the organisation. Therefore, I'm going to put those values in, I'm going to hire those people, and I'm going to be successful because I've lined my competitive advantages up to my values, to my people, and I'm going to outcompete the competition. We don't get to choose our values. Our values are defined by who we are over the past 20 or 30 generations, whatever it's been. Luckily, thank God, they resonate with most people in New Zealand. Whanaungatanga, family, looking after family, that's not hard to get your head around, and at its crux, I've got it down the bottom there, but mō tātou amoa ka uri e muri aki nei. For us and our children after us, that resonates, I suspect, with almost everyone in this room. It certainly is a core value set in my own family, and so that's good. Manaakitanga, looking after our people, but it's more than that. Ngāi Tahu feels it has a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of everyone that lives in our tribal space in the South Island. So come down and visit, and I'll always pick up the bill, for example. But more importantly, when we're out there doing our environmental work or taking a position on economic and environmental development, we're doing that in a way that is trying to balance the interests of the whole community in Te Waipounamu, not just Ngāi Tahu's views. Tohu Ngā Taga expertise, kaitiakitanga stewardship, it's our responsibility to the land and everything else. Tikanga, let's go about things in a way that's appropriate and reflects our values and each other. We talk a lot in Ngāi Tahu, we take a long time to build consensus, but when we build consensus I reckon we move faster than almost any other organisation I've worked for. Rangatiratanga is around leadership and self-determination, accountability to oneself. So these values are what we embed in everything we do, and we have not got anywhere near it all right, but you've got to remember 15 years is such a small learning program. Just better keep track of time. Ngāi Tahu's outcomes focused, and I want to make just a couple of points I'll run through. So Ngāi Tahu has this document called Ngāi Tahu 2025, which sets out the vision and aspirations of the iwi, and they were set by iwi members back at the time of the settlement. It's time for an update, to be honest. There are basically 9 pillars, 4 what I'd call outcomes and 5 what I call enablers. But the point I wanted to touch on today is one of those pillars is called tiputia, and Holdings operates under that one pillar. Under that pillar we have economic sustainability for whānau, and we have support for economic development of small businesses and all the rest of it as well. So Ngāi Tahu Holdings, to put this in perspective, is one part of 9 pillars of the iwi's aspirations. How we work is that we're there to support those aspirations. The role that the iwi has given us to support those aspirations is running commercially successful business that align and fit with their values, that make them feel proud to be Ngāi Tahu. Ideally, we like businesses that contribute to the well-being of the broader economy, so if we could find decent infrastructure investments in the South Island, we'd probably do that. But fundamentally, we're at our heart, we're there to drive commercial businesses in line with the iwi's values and their aspirations and how they feel about themselves. This is where we get interesting. So, for example, we don't do any charitable donations and holdings. We barely do any sponsorships. We don't do any environmental restoration. We probably do a lot less than what Fonterra does. But you have to remember that every dollar we make sits in the iwi and goes into education grants, environmental restoration, cultural revitalisation, and all the other aspirations I've got. Every dollar, actually, almost every dollar goes into charitable purpose. And the ones that don't go into charitable purpose is just because the government's definition isn't right. So our view is that the holdings company is a subset of the iwi and one part of one pillar of 9 of the iwi's aspirations. We can't be making the decisions on what the most important non-commercial aspirations for the iwi are. So we take our money and we give it to the iwi, and then they choose whether education is more important, whether environmental restoration is more important, and all the rest of it. And it's bloody hard. My job's easy compared to what they have to do. If you think about it, even if I take education, we have our maraes running after school homework clubs. So should we support that? The government's education policies generally work a lot better for Pākehā kids than they do for Māori kids. So they spend billions on education. So is our money better spent on advocacy to get that corrected? We do out-of-school tuition grants. We do university grants. We know from the research that we're grappling with early childhood education is probably the area that can make the biggest difference, so we put money there. So these guys are not only trying to decide whether we should focus on keeping the family connected together, environmental restoration, education programs, but then they decide, do we do it in the centre? Do we work with the government to do it? Do we distribute it to our papatapa runanga to do it? So this matrix of complexity. I've having spent some time there, got a massive amount of admiration. For every dollar we spend, there is God knows how many more in free time and volunteers from members of the iwi. So it's important that our social licence to operate comes from being part of Ngāi Tahu. It comes from living that value set of the community, not some imposed value set for commercial reason. And it's all integrated into our, I've used the word DNA, and we're still trying to achieve it, but it is just us being us. And in being us, we have to find the partners that will do business because we are who we are, because we won't change. And if we don't align, that's cool, because there's one thing we've learned over the years, that there's more than one way to do things, and we don't have to be the same. But we are who we are, we have to be true to ourselves, and we have to find those business opportunities, partners that enable those values and that to be reflected. And then if we can achieve that, then we back our commercial nous to make money out of it. An example, Ngāi Tahu farming. So bit of a precursor. Lake Ellesmere, I don't know, many people know it, we call it Te Waihora. It's tongata on Ngāi Tahu. It's one of the most precious lakes in the South Island and sustained life for a large part of the iwi. As part of the settlement, we also got back some what we called tribal properties. These are properties with no commercial gain, and we cost us money to maintain them, but they're very important. We wouldn't have settled without some of the stuff coming back, some of the soft stuff. We wanted that lake back. The government wouldn't give it to us. Sinakimi says they didn't trust Māori to look after things like that at the stage. I think things have changed, and if we were settling today, there might have been a different outcome. But we did get the lake bed back. Fast forward 15 years, it is now one of the most polluted, if not the most polluted lake in New Zealand, on the back of farming in the catchment area. So whether that was an example of poor farming practice, whether that was an example of poor regulation or poor enforcement of regulation by local and regional government, or whether that was that the science just hadn't evolved to the point to prevent it happening, it kind of doesn't matter. My point was that the iwi was extremely suspicious of farming. And they were even more suspicious of dairy farming, because this thing that was probably one of the most precious things to Ngāi Tahu had been polluted beyond recognition, and you can't swim or drink the water in it. So we said we're going to farm, and I want to make a couple of quick comments. We've got 16,000 of the best land in North Canterbury. It's in 2 contiguous blocks, which makes it possibly the most unique farming opportunity in the country. Well, I think it does. We have enough land for $1 billion a dairy farm. We'll make hundreds of millions off it, and it's our single largest commercial opportunity in the group. It could be massively successful. The economic consequence of not being able to develop it from forestry to farming is that you would miss out on all those gains. Not only would you miss out on those gains, the iwi would be forced to say, we can't sell that, because we don't believe you can farm it environmentally soundly, so we can't let you sell it to someone else to farm it in a unsustainable way. So the consequences for this commercial bet were significant. And in many ways, it would be the difference between a successful decade of commercial operations or not. So we had to go through a practice with it, and how we did it is it borders a region of a couple of those papatipurunanga. So under our way of doing things, we say the locals have what we call mana whenua, which is responsibility for the well-being of the land and the region they operate in. So Turunanga looks at it, and they're looking at a total iwi perspective of 18, and they're going, 2 could say no farming in this area and have a dire financial consequence for the entire iwi. But we are who we are, so we set up a working group with the locals on the basis that they are the people that will need to have a big say in this final decision, and we work through it. We work through our farming practice with them. We work through how we're going to farm. We drew on best practice from the likes of Lincoln University and elsewhere. We developed a farming model. We agreed that on the basis of the theory that we'd be allowed to do 3 pilot farms. We developed 3 pilot farms. We're measuring all the impact, and we've reached agreement that we can now continue to develop the next lot of farms. But the point I wanted to make was, regardless of the economic consequence, we went back to our fundamental values that said that we need the locals in the region to be comfortable with our farming practices, and the consequences, we'll worry about those down the track if we need to. What we do is different. We create employment opportunities on the farms. We have a program with Lincoln University and others called Whenakura, which is a training program. So we're aiming to train our Ngāi Tahus to work from the right beginning, and then to support them right up to leadership positions. So we have all that going on. We have a lot of planting, native replanting. We know pine trees on our farms, and we probably plant 10 to 20 times as much as other farmers. All our central pivots, we monitor our water. We spread our effluent over something like 80% of it over the farm. I think the regulation's 33%. And so we've gone and got, we have lysometers to track the impact of the effluent or the wastage all drifting through the soils, because that's what really killed Tuahora. It got stuck in their soil, and then eventually it started to go into the water table. So there's 20 years of crap built up in the soils. It'll take a generation for that to move through. So we've got scientifically proven latest model farming. Now, don't get me wrong, the chief of holdings, when the guys came and told me how hard this was going to be, I told them they're hardened up and how hard it can be to build best practice farming when you're starting from scratch. So we had some advantages. We had 16,000 hectares in 2 blocks, so we were able to do things on a scale that most farm conversions couldn't. And fundamentally, we took some of the financial benefits of doing things on a scale to build an environmental practice in the farm that most farmers wouldn't do. So that's how we got through it and we got successful. But I could point out other example. Our seafood guys objected to the expansion of the taking more bluff oysters out during the Rugby World Cup. We didn't think that the stocks would sustain it regardless of the commercial benefit to us. We run some commercial tourism operations. We weave our stories into all our commercial operations. Hard to do on the shot over jet, but if anyone ever goes on the Hollywood track or the Dark River experience, you'll hear about Ngāi Tahu and all those type of things. How we do that, we go back to our principles. We go back to the local papatupa runanga, we bring them in, we have a chat about the product, we ask them how we can weave our stories into it, and we do it with that community group. And so I think a long way of saying short is that we are Ngāi Tahu. The business will fit who we are, or we won't do the business.